Hello, so today is December 4th, 2020, and what I wanted to do is talk about fear and my fear bullet points. So I wrote down my fear bullet points here that express what's negative about fear, but there's also a positive. So it's really, is fear good? Is fear bad? It's actually both. So here's my fear bullet points right off the bat. Number one, fear disempowers you. So it stops you often in your tracks from doing what you want to do in your life, your goals, your ambitions, your progress. It blocks that. It stops you from being able to move ahead in life. Number two, makes you unable to feel love. There's scientific proven research that says that if you're feeling fear, you can't feel love at the same exact time. Number three, it creates worry, which leads to being emotionally unrealistic. Number four, it lowers your inhibitions. Still, what you're going to do in life, how you're going to move forward. It makes you afraid and it makes you stop. It makes you afraid to make progress, afraid to move forward, or more importantly, afraid to make the first step in moving forward. Number five, it brings on stress, anxiety, and angst. Anxiety obviously comes from fear. It's built up through fear. Anxiety in itself is worrying about dangers of the future. So fearing the dangers of the future. Possible dangers, might I add. Dangers that might not ever happen. Worries from dangers that might not happen. It's the same thing. Angst from that, and the anxiety is what brings on the stress. Now, I figured it would be easier to explain fear if I can explain physically what's going on in your brain involving fear. So, in this diagram, you can notice that the man is obviously being fearful of something. So let's hypothetically say that this man just saw a bear. Now, the crazy thing about our brains is they're already pre-programmed for fear in the amygdala here to take over the immediate response. It's a fight or flight response. And that happens immediately before it hits this neocortex area over here. The neocortex area and the precortex is where we actually use logic and reasoning and understand things to calm ourselves down, to understand our fears, is to reassure ourselves that there is no danger, there is nothing to be fearful, or it's not worth being fearful over. But first, this process happens. We see the fear, and in the amygdala, we have our fear memories, and it remembers our fears, and it remembers what we're most worried about and what's going to bring on the anxiety and all of that. And so through visually, we connect with our fear, and it goes through the thalamus into the visual cortex connected to the amygdala, which is the fear part of the brain, or the worry part of the brain. And we can see, I have the notes on this as well. We have the hippocampus here, we have the amygdala here, and then we have the prefrontal cortex here. The prefrontal cortex, which is part of the neocortex, connects all of our logic, our emotions, our reasoning, our empathy. It is the evolved part of the brain. It's a part of the brain that, they say that was more developed from the primates or our ancestors, that allows us to think more logically and be more involved, be more intelligent. From that, we hit over here. But since visually it's going through the thalamus, the visual cortex, and the amygdala, that's before it even hits that area. So we have to calm ourselves down from that. And that's why quite often what people use is they use meditation, they use yoga, they use calming music to calm themselves down so that they can take control of the amygdala and not have it overreact and not have it be fearful enough to create that worry that creates the anxiety and therefore creates the stress, right? So right from here, the prefrontal cortex is the highly developed part of the frontal lobe that plays a role in the regulation of complex cognitive, emotional, and behavioral functioning. The amygdala is the emotional center of the brain, the fear center. The hippocampus is involved in forming, storing, and processing memory. So we need to educate ourselves and learn and store those memories and education in the hippocampus so that it's connected to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the logic and then can calm this down. So the prefrontal cortex remembers, the hippocampus here, where it has stored that memory. And then we can see here the two different parts of the brain, right? So the prefrontal cortex, the logical part, the insight part, the intelligent part. Empathy, insight, response flexibility, emotion regulation, controlling the amygdala, learning emotional intelligence. Body regulation, morality, intuition, attuned communication, and fear modulation. So that's in its own, the prefrontal cortex. That's what that takes care of. Now the other side of the brain, the other part of the brain, limbic brain. That's the fight or flight, freeze, stress response. Am I safe? Do people want me? Emotions live in that area. So another note on this is the survival mechanism lets us react to things before the rational brain has time to mull things over. So it reacts before we even notice it. So if we're fearful of something, we immediately react emotionally, stressfully to something that we see right in front of us before we can even put the logic into it. But if we have that information, if we are confident, if we're, intelligent in a way that we've actually learned about fears and learned how to not let them control us, we can react more on the pre-cortex side, in the neocortex, to stop the amygdala from causing really the anxiety and the stress. The fear is always going to be there because it's pre-programmed into us. And even with evolving intelligently and stuff like that, we're still going to have the amygdala. But the amygdala is a good thing because if we don't have the amygdala, then we don't respond to the fear right away. It, builds us up ready to be able to fight or flight in immediate threat or danger. So we can react to that very quickly. And that's the good part of the amygdala, but it has its flaws, which causes us to be emotionally distressed, depressed, emotionally just not kept well together, that we're having these issues because we're stressing out and we're letting our emotions get control of us. And what we need to do is learn to calm all of that down, because through educating ourselves, we can learn how to control that. And this actually comes from mindfulness, meditation, and just learning how to react logically to a fearful situation. Now, like I said, if that man did see a bear and he was reacting to it in that way, he was reacting just out of fear. If he doesn't have the intelligence of knowing what to do next, then he's just afraid. So if he's just afraid, then he could run, which is a bad idea for a bear response. He might fight the bear, which is probably not going to work out too well for him as well. Or he can know from his neocortex, his precortex area, that the smartest thing to do is to actually not act afraid, but to play dead. And that's what you learn about bears. If you play dead, then they're not going to feel the need to attack you. You know, if you're running, they want to chase you. If you threaten them, of course, they're going to fight you back. On to a different point of that, though, is if you don't know what to do in a different kind of situation that's not involving something physically, something emotionally, you don't know how to take control of a certain emotion, that emotion explodes in an unintelligent way as well, and it causes you to get upset, overreact, and just act out of context. So if you're not logically thinking about something, the worry can continue to build up, and you allow it to do that because you are afraid of the future. You are afraid of possible dangers, threats to your wealth, emotions, environment. Maybe you have some kind of health condition and you think that it might be worse than it actually is, or it's spiraling out of control, or some kind of illness that you're afraid is not going to be cured, something like that, or you're being more like a hypochondriac for certain things. So you get a cold and you think that you have a dangerous disease or flu or something like that. Then obviously the intelligent thing to do would be to educate yourself further on your symptoms and to obviously take the next step and to see a doctor so that they can calm you down. And that's a social response of being able to calm down the amygdala, is getting information from somebody else. So there's a social aspect to helping you out where you don't have to deal with all of it yourself and you don't have to just talk yourself down from that ledge. But there's also the educating yourself to learning that it might not be as bad as you think something is going to be. And they do say that 90% of your worries are things that never happen. So most likely it would be something that you're over worrying about. So after the amygdala takes that fear to a different level, you have to be able to talk the amygdala down in a way. And that's what the neocortex actually does, is it communicates, as I mentioned, the prefrontal cortex here is calming the amygdala down. The hippocampus is where all this memories is. But the amygdala has its own memories there. It has its fear memories built in. It remembers what you're afraid of, what bothers you the most, your fears of the future and of the present, immediate dangers that could possibly come to be in the future. So let me get back to my bullet points here. That's the way in which fear disempowers you, and it creates this worry that leads to you being emotionally unrealistic. So I hope that's been very helpful explaining this part of the brain that we're not actually able to control, and controlling the part of the brain that now we know that we can through learning certain things, learning and being more confident from learning how we can control these emotions. But the most important thing is, that's why the fears live in the amygdala. So if we conquer our fears, we can see how we can live such an amazing life, because fear is going to take over your life. So the more fears you have that are unhealthy, they're going to really hurt you in life. It's going to be a big part. There's basically two things in life then. There's fear and there's love. Those are two things that are controlling your life. So if we attack fear, even attack one fear one by one, then we learn confidence, and we learn that we were overreacting or we were illogically thinking to certain things and on certain things. We're not being intelligent is the simplest way to explain it. We're not being emotionally intelligent because we're letting our amygdala take over our brain, create all these irrational fears. I could be afraid of a fear, and I could have that fear, of course, but I could be afraid of a fear too, which heightens it as well. So I'm afraid that I'm a fearful person, and now everything's heightened to a certain different level. But if we gain confidence, if I go and learn that, bears aren't that bad, or I learn that, what are the odds of something actually that I'm afraid of happening, and let my worries get out of tact and get control of my life. If you get rid of the fears, you feel more confident, you're more happy, and you're able to make more progress in life because you don't have this worry in the back of your head. You don't have this fear. Fear keeps us from doing so many things. And as I mentioned a couple of times before, because it's extremely important to know that it creates this anxiety within us, and the anxiety just it can harm our bodies, it can harm our health. It can keep us from doing important things that we need to do, or physically taking care of ourselves, including eating right or exercising or something like that. So if we get control of the fear, we know that fear is going to come before anything else. So maybe that's how we need to think. We need to address fear first. We have to know that we're afraid of certain things, and we have to approach them instead of running away from them. So we can use the amygdala the way that it was put in our brains to be used for, and where it's important, where we actually do have to defend ourselves or, flee in certain scenarios. If you see a snake, for example, and you're fearful of that snake, that could be logical, but you use that in a way where you turn around and walk the other way, and that snakes don't jump, then you're probably going to be okay. Once you leave that area, then that's going to be good, and you don't have to sit there and look at the ground all the time, especially if you're at Walmart and you keep looking at the ground because you're crazy afraid of snakes for some reason, and you think a snake's going to come into Walmart when that's totally illogical. It sounds silly, but sometimes that's the way that it is. Now, a snake, like some serious attack snake that is poisonous or venomous and is near you, that you have intimidated, that's a rational fear. But a little tiny spider in your house, that is nowhere near you, is probably not a good enough reason to freak out when you're standing over where I'm standing and it's not even threatening you. Then you're totally afraid of that. Your body goes into this emotional distress, and all you can think about is that spider. And maybe it creeps up into your memory in your brain when you're not even looking at a spider, and now all of a sudden you're afraid of spiders, and it's a distraction from the positives in your life, which is negative. This irrational fear is not even a good enough reason to bring yourself down. So if we think about our fears, fear of not being good enough, fear of not accomplishing enough, fear of something along those lines, not accomplishing enough, fear of not being enough, fear of not making some sports team, or not making enough money, or not progressing in your career. What you need to be doing is not sitting there and being afraid of it and letting that fear control your life and keeping you from actually making progress. What you need to be doing is looking at those fears, analyzing them, seeing how rational they are, writing down what you can do in response to that. If you build your confidence on each fear, you can be stronger than each fear. But we all have fears that are built inside of us that we've obtained either from the past or the present, or we're going to get more fears in the future. Something seems threatening, we're afraid of it. What we should be doing is we should be fighting it. we really shouldn't be running from our fears unless they're physically harmful to us in a rational way. What we should be doing, though, in an emotional way, is looking at those fears in the same way. If we compare and contrast those, if we say that I'm afraid that I'll never advance in my career, and we look at that and how can we fight that? How can we fight that feeling and that emotion? How can we get ahead of that fear? Maybe we need to look at our careers and see what we can do in them. Like how can we become better at our careers? Well, everything is tied to intelligence. We need to learn in everything that we do. So learning to be a better employee in our careers or a better owner, operator of a business is going to make progress on that. It's going to make you more confident. It's going to help conquer that fear. And eventually, that fear could totally go away. But your body is reacting the same way through the amygdala through a physical fear as it is in an emotional fear. Before even getting to that neocortex area in the brain, where the logic and the reasoning and the intelligence is really at. So stay confident. Don't be fearful. Recognize your fears. And then you can be so much stronger and free from them. You can disconnect yourself from these fears because they will keep you from sleeping. They will keep you from eating. They will keep you from making progress. They'll beat you down if you let them. So I hope this video has been helpful. It's December 4th, like I mentioned. This is an unscripted video. I just take it from the bullet points, take it from the notes. I hope you enjoyed the visuals and everything like that. And I hope to show you some more positive, helpful videos in the future. Thank you.